For as the light of the morning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, and covereth the whole earth, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God, and the days will come that you shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and it shall be in his own time, and in his own way, and according to his own will. This is Unveiling Jesus Christ.
Hello and welcome to another podcast on Unveiling Jesus Christ. I'm John Casanet, and in my last several podcasts, I've laid the foundation for the discussion that will continue today about the 7 plagues of the 7th seal. So far, we've talked about the forest of these 7 seals quite a bit to give some context to the individual trees that I'm going to be discussing today. This includes a discussion of the fire and the burning that will occur during all of the plague. My previous podcast also talked about all of the bloodshed that is prevalent in all of the plagues. So now we begin with the first plague of the 7th seal and find that all these elements are combined in a partial judgment that afflicts 1/3 of the trees and all the grass in Revelation 8:7. For the nutshell version of my discussion today, see section 104 in my book. So let's begin with John's words found in Revelation 8:7. So we're covering a whole verse today. We're really moving forward now. This verse says, quote, "The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up," close quote. This first trumpet angel of the 7th seal is likely one of the 7 archangels that I've described before. He sounds his trump after the necessary preparations were made as spoken of in my prior podcasts. This first angel will unleash hail and fire mingled with blood. Some translations say mingled in blood. For example, this is true in the Vulgate, which was Jerome's Latin translation of the Bible from the 5th century. It's also found in the Septuagint, which is a Hebrew translation, which reads, "There was hail and the fire flaming in the hail." The essential meaning of this is that hail and fire will be mingled together in blood. So you've got these stones of hail and balls of fire in this shower of blood. The blood is visible, but beneath the surface appear to be these hailstones and coals of fire. This is an unusual combination, as explained by Richard Draper, who said that both fire and hail, a most unusual combination, strike the earth. The image reflects the 7th Egyptian plague, where a fire mingled with hail, very grievous, fell all over the Pharaoh's domain and killed many people and animals, albeit the Hebrews were spared. The image found in Revelation ratchets up that message. Not only is there a rain of ice and fire, but also of blood. And in the footnotes, he states, "A rain of fire and blood signal the end of an age." Roman prodigy lists mentioned bloody rains and associate them with divine wrath. Close quote. All this means that bloody hail and fire will be cast down with great force on the earth. This is not going to be a light sprinkle or spring shower. I'm reminded a little bit of the Jumanji movie, the old version from 1995 with Robin Williams. And in one of the plagues in the movie, it starts out with this light rain, and Bonnie Hunt says, "Well, a little rain never hurt anyone." And then Robin Williams replied, "Yeah, but a lot will kill you." And they start moving to higher ground. Well, Walter Scott describes the import of the words describing the hail and fire in Revelation 8:7, saying, quote, "And they were cast upon the earth," thus covering as a subject of judgment precisely the same sphere on which the angel scattered the fire from the altar. In both cases, the term cast implies irresistible power behind, that the judgment of the hail and fire with the blood is not traceable to natural causes is evident from the fact that they were cast down, not falling from the heavens in an ordinary way, but impelled by an unseen yet powerful arm. Close quote. Walter Scott is here referring to Revelation 8:5, where Christ cast down live coals of fire on the earth, which I discussed in my podcast from November 24, 24. Now, the throwing down or casting down expresses various degrees of violence, and it differs from casting a net or casting lots, which are some of the other words in the New Testament that are used to describe this notion of casting something. The idea of casting down is synonymous with the word throw, but I have to warn you, there are apparent differences even in the word throw, which we learn this time from the movie Sahara, which is where Matthew McConaughey, who was Dirk Pitt, hunts for this ironclad warship in the middle of the Sahara Desert while being chased by the bad guy dictator from Mali, who was called General Kazim. So Dirk's love interest is Penelope Cruz, who plays Dr. Rojas, whose job is to throw sticks of dynamite in the side of a dried up riverbed to create these plumes of dust when the dynamite explodes that will prevent Kazim, who's flying behind them in a helicopter, from being able to see them and shoot them. And so there they are in this chase scene with the helicopter, dynamite exploding and big plumes of dust going up in the air, and Dirk is telling Dr. Rojas, listen, I don't want you to throw the dynamite like a girl. So we get throw, 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 dust, 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 and eventually, of course, they get away. And when we get down to the end of the movie, Dirk is on the beach in Malibu with Dr. Rojas, and as they're laying there, he turns to her and says, there's been something that I've been wanting to tell you since the experience in Mali. And she kind of looks at him, and then he says, you do throw like a girl. That's kind of where the movie ended. Sorry for the spoiler. So here we have this throwing down or casting down of hail and fire in this bloody mass, but it's not the kind of throwing like a girl. Now, I know I've just offended half the audience, but I'm the father of 3 girls, and I know that 3 of them throw like girls. One is kind of borderline. But we're talking about throw like a 90-mile-per-hour fastball. That's the kind of throwing that we're talking about here. John McClintock's Bible Encyclopedia explains the imagery of the word cast or throw in biblical terms, saying, quote, cast, the representative of many Hebrew words and usually of the Greek, occurs in many applications as a synonym of throw. The following seem to deserve special notice. 1. Amaziah, king of Judah, caused the punishment of casting down from the top of a rock to be inflicted on 10,000 Edomites, whom he had taken in war, and the Greeks and Romans were in the habit of condemning certain criminals to be cast down from the top of a rock, especially the latter nation, whence the famous Tarpeian Rock at Rome. Close quote. Now, I'm putting up a picture of the Tarpeian Rock located in Rome, which is a steep cliff on the south side of the Capitoline Hill, which is one of the 7 hills of Rome. And I'll be talking about these 7 hills in more detail in subsequent podcasts. But at the Tarpeian Rock, we've got murderers, traders, slaves who were in the habit of stealing from their masters. Once convicted, were thrown down from this cliff that's about 80 feet tall, and that's what is being referred to by McClintock. Now, another instance where we find this idea of something being cast down is in Revelation 12:10, which also says, quote, and I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Close quote. Now, if you're familiar with Revelation 12, you'll recognize that what is being described here is the occasion at the end of the war in heaven, in the premortal existence, when Lucifer, the accuser of our brethren in premortality, is cast out of the premortal existence down to this earth with his followers after they lost the war in heaven. They were cast or thrown down forcibly. Joseph Seiss explained the overall image of this hail and fire and blood as it was cast or thrown down when he said that here we have a corresponding visitation. Only the fire is more destructive, and there is the further element of blood mingled with the fire and hail. The whole picture is that of a tremendous tempest of hailstones, lightning, and bloody products of the infuriated elements. But whether the like of what John describes ever happened before or not, God has said concerning the great day, I will show wonders in heaven above and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire. And the manner in which he will do it is here unveiled. A storm of hail and fire and bloody interminglings shall fall upon and envelop the world, close quote. Obviously, the Lord doesn't throw like a girl, is essentially what Joseph Seiss is saying. Walter Scott also gives a pretty graphic description of what we can expect, saying that hail signifies a sudden, sharp, and overwhelming judgment from above, God, the executor of it. Fire is the expression of God's wrath. As a symbol, it is more largely employed than any other in the sacred volume. Thorough, unsparing, agonizing judgment is denoted by fire. It has, of course, other significations, but we are only concerned now with its judicial application. Blood signifies death, both physical and moral. Now, while the two former symbols may be regarded separately, hail and fire, we cannot so treat the third. The blood was mingled with those two elements of destruction. Combined, they express a truly awful outburst of divine wrath, close quote. The first trumpet plague, as we have alluded to earlier, is similar to the seventh plague of Egypt. Now remember, the Egyptian plagues are types for the eschatological plagues of the seventh seal. Philip Schaff discusses the typology generally, saying that the language used both in this and the following judgments takes us back to the Old Testament, and more particularly to the plagues of Egypt. Pharaoh, who was visited by these plagues, was always to Israel the symbol of the cruel and oppressive treatment by the world of the children of God, while the judgments of the Almighty upon Egypt, vindicating his own glory and effecting the deliverance of his people, became types of the manner in which the same great ends shall be effected in every age of the church's history. Close quote. The seventh plague of Egypt, you may recall, was the worst hailstorm in Egyptian history, which brought hail and fire mingled with the hail, as recorded in Exodus 9:24, which states, quote, So there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as there was none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation, close quote. With that as a backdrop, consider what Bruce R. McConkie said of the first trumpet plague when he said, quote, Of the nation that shall rise to fight his people in that day, meaning the second coming, the Lord says, And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him, and upon the bands, and upon the many people that are with him, and overflowing rain, and great hailstones, fire and brimstone. By these means a third of all the trees and green grass on earth are to be destroyed. The plague of hail and fire rained upon Pharaoh's Egypt in the days of the deliverance of Israel from bondage was perhaps symbolical of this greater deliverance of the Lord's people by the forces of nature in the latter days. Close quote. Since at least the time of the seventh Egyptian plague, hail has been a symbol of God's divine judgment. It's frequently designed to inspire repentance, as explained by Elder McConkie, who said that the Lord uses natural disasters to bring us the conscious realization that we are dependent upon a supreme being for all things. He uses them as a means of judgment to punish us for evil deeds done in the flesh. And all of this has particular application to this day of wickedness when the world is being prepared to receive its rightful king. Close quote. Thus we see that the message in this first trumpet plague, as bad as it is a message for the people to repent, for the Lord is nigh. The Lord has also frequently used hail to punish the wicked. A modern example of this occurred in June 1834 when a Missouri mob had assembled against Zion's camp and was dispersed by a sudden violent hailstorm. This is recorded by Heber C. Kimball, who said that hosts of the people in Missouri were up in arms against us, both behind and before us, on our right and on our left. How did God defend us then? He sent a hailstorm fierce enough to stop their progress. The hailstones were so large that they cut their horses' bridles, broke their gun stocks, and cut holes in their hats. The storm had such an effect upon them that they would not any longer pursue us. The waters of the river rose 40 feet in one night, and the whole region was flooded. Close quote. Joseph Fielding Smith also records as a second-hand account what happened on that night when he said, quote, "An hour before sundown, the mobbers commenced firing a cannon. But when the storm broke, they sought shelter under their wagons, in hollow trees, and wherever they could hide. Very little hail fell in the camp. The brethren found shelter in an old meeting house, while in the camp of the mobbers, hailstones and lumps of ice cut down trees, and crops and trees were twisted out of shape. The water in Little Fishing River rose 30 feet in that many minutes. Some out of this wicked mob said, if that was the way God fought for the Mormons, they might as well go about their business." Close quote. Notice also that the first trumpet plague of hail and fire is also mingled with blood. This confirms that it will be more deadly than the seventh plague of Egypt, which did not include the element of blood. Since blood is a symbol of life and death when blood is spilled, this means there will be bloodshed at the time of the first trumpet plague of the seventh seal. It is the blood of death. It's probably not actual blood that rains down, but represents the literal death associated with the hail and fire that is part of the first trumpet plague. Joseph Smith makes this interesting prophecy of our future when he said, quote, "And now I am prepared to say by the authority of Jesus Christ that not many years shall pass away before the United States shall present such a scene of bloodshed as has not a parallel in the history of our nation. Pestilence, hail, famine, and earthquake will sweep the wicked of this generation from off the face of the land to open and prepare the way for the return of the lost tribes of Israel from the north country." Close quote. The fire mingled with the hail could actually also be lightning, or fire may literally rain down from heaven with the hail, as was done in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah. Or consider the images of the nighttime bombings that are going on in the Middle East. As you consider those images, they look a lot like fire raining down from heaven, right? Well, Bruce R. McConkie quoted Revelation 8:7 and then said, quote, "Is this the overflowing rain and great hailstones, fire and brimstone, of which Ezekiel spoke? Could all this be brought to pass through atomic warfare, or will it come by natural disasters, as when God rained fire and brimstone upon Sodom and Gomorrah?" Speculatively, most of the plagues and destructions here announced could be brought to pass by men themselves, as they use the weapons and armaments they have created, close quote. As you consider the possibility that the hail and fire mingled with blood is something of a man-made nature, I'm reminded that really the first trumpet plague has as its goal to help the people repent, to recognize that there is a supreme being who controls the elements and is something that they will see his hand in this, and people will begin to turn back to God. So that doesn't occur if men are the makers of this madness that will occur during the first trumpet plague. So I tend to lean toward the idea that it is not going to be man-made bombs that we see during the first trumpet plague, and spiritually sensitive people will recognize God's hand in this plague and not the hand of men fighting other men. It's somewhat interesting, by way of a historical precedent, to also note that there is situations where there have been red precipitation from natural causes. But don't be lulled in by the Jumanji effect, in the sense that a little red precipitation never hurt anyone. Yeah, but a lot can kill you. So here we have the first trumpet plague, where Orson Pratt has said that when the first angel sounds, there will come upon the inhabitants of the earth a great hailstorm mingled with fire and blood, and so severe will this storm of fire and blood that 1/3 of the trees will be destroyed and all the grass will be burned up, close quote. Notice here that we have 1/3 of the trees burned up, but we have all of the grass burned up. And I'm going to talk about this, but let's consider first what Richard Draper has to say about this, saying the fraction is used 12 times in the plague chapters, and each makes the same point. Though much is destroyed, more is left. Thus the fraction shows that these judgments are not yet final. Therefore, the fraction should be understood less to denote an exact amount and more to connote God's partial judgment upon an intractable generation. The King James translation has only the trees and grass affected by the first strike. The best Greek manuscripts, however, state that 1/3 of the earth was also smitten, broadening the effect of the first strike. Close quote. So we begin here with a judgment upon 1/3 of the earth, or specifically the land, because when we get to future plagues, we're going to be talking about judgments upon the sea and the waters. So we have specifically in mind the land, or 1/3 part of the earth. We can anticipate that there will be fires on a global scale that will literally burn the 1/3 of trees and all grass on a worldwide scale. Now notice again, we're talking here about 1/3 of the trees, but John is specific in saying that all the green grass shall be burned. Albert Barnes explains the distinction, saying, quote, "And the 1/3 part of the trees was burnt up by the fire that came down with the hail and the blood, and all green grass was burnt up, wherever this lighted upon the earth." The meaning would seem to be that wherever this tempest beat, the effect was to destroy 1/3 part, that is, a large portion of the trees, and to consume all the grass. A portion of the trees, strong and mighty, would stand against it, but what was so tender as grass is, would be consumed. The sense does not seem to be that the tempest would be confined to 1/3 part of the world and destroy all the trees and the grass there, but that it would be a sweeping and general tempest, and that wherever it spread, it would prostrate 1/3 part of the trees and consume all the grass. Thus understood, it would seem to mean that in reference to those things in the world which were firm and established like trees, it would not sweep them wholly away, though it would make great desolation. But in reference to those which were delicate and feeble like grass, it would sweep them wholly away. Close quote. The burning of the trees partially and all grass completely is to be taken literally, as explained by Joseph Seiss, who said that the truth is, if earth, trees, and grass do not mean earth, trees, and grass, no man can tell what they mean. Letting go the literal signification of the record, we launch out upon an endless sea of sheer conjecture, turn the whole apocalypse into an incomprehensible riddle, and force the conclusion that God was mistaken when he named it the lifting off of the veil. I must insist that a mighty storm of hail and fire mingled with blood means a storm of hail and fire mingled with blood. That earth, trees, and all green grass means earth, trees, and all green grass. And that the burning and scorching and destruction means burning, scorching, and destruction. Close quote. It's important to note that the seventh Egyptian plague destroyed every herb of the field. Thus, the first trumpet plague can be no less destructive. Consider the devastating wire fires in California that are only the tip of the iceberg. I think about all of these kinds of things, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, well, I wouldn't want to be in the fire insurance business when the seventh plague opens, because it's going to be a losing proposition. So how do we reconcile the destruction of 1/3 of the earth with the fact that all the grass is burned? We have a couple possibilities. One is all grass in 1/3 part of the earth, or we could have grass in all parts of the earth. Henry Alford states his view as follows, quote, "It is not said the hail and etc. were cast on a third part, but that the destruction occasioned by them extended to a third part of the earth on which they were cast. And this is most expressly declared to be so in this first case by all green grass being also destroyed, not a third part. And the third part of the trees in all the earth, not in the third part, was burnt up, and all green grass upon the earth, no longer a third part, possibly because green grass would first and unavoidably everywhere scorch up at the approach of such a plague, whereas the hardier crops and trees might partially escape." Close quote. In short, during the first trumpet plague, which is a worldwide plague, it's not just a third of the earth, but the effects of it are only a partial judgment. Keep in mind my last podcast where I said that 1/3 is a qualitative measurement, not a quantitative measurement. Joseph Seiss again explains that, quote, "The third is mentioned not with rigid strictness as absolutely just that proportion, but as we would say in general terms, 1/3 of the earth was burned, and so also the third of the trees. The Egyptian plague smote and brake every tree of the field. This destroys many more in the aggregate because the visitation is so much more widespread, but it does not consume all. It carries fearful havoc among the forests, orchards, and timberlands of the earth, but still the major part of the trees escape." Close quote. So if we focus on the effects of the first trumpet plague as opposed to where it is occurring specifically, we see that there is going to be this decimation of the agricultural industry. Even though only 1/3 of it is affected, it's going to be horrible. There are going to be worldwide food shortages. People will turn to violence and anarchy as food dwindles. The blood that accompanies the crop-destroying hail and fire could symbolically represent the bloodshed of people that turn on each other during this time of panic and civil unrest. Consider the inspired words of Jesus Christ as revised by Joseph Smith the prophet in Joseph Smith Matthew 1:29, saying, quote, "Behold, I speak for mine elect's sake. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places." Close quote. So the type of famine that Christ was predicted could be the very type of famine that could occur after we have this devastation just from the first trumpet plague, where 1/3 of the trees are burned up, where all of the grass is burned up. Just imagine the effects of that and the outreach of it from just this 1/3. The first presidency issued the following statement in 1954 that I think is relevant to what we're talking about in today's podcast. They said that while the God of all the earth is pouring out his judgments upon a wicked world in fulfillment of his words spoken by the mouth of his prophets in past and present generations, by pestilence, famine, tempest, and devouring flame, men and nations, drunk with their own fury, appear impatient to hasten their own consummation. In recklessness and wrath, they destroy each other upon the rivers of water and railroads, the widespread lakes and open sea. They rush to their own destruction. Nation rises against nation. Civil discord engenders strife, and war, crimson war, with all its attendant horrors, lends its desolating aid to depopulate the earth. Close quote. I think what essentially the first presidency here is predicting is that even as the plagues of the 7 trumpet angels sound, including this first one with hail and fire and bloodshed, we can see that that's not going to bring an instant end to all of the man-made calamities, catastrophes, and warfare that will be occurring. We can see hail and fire. The mingling of blood could very well be from the type of wars that will continue to exist even as the 7th seal is opened and these 7 trumpet plagues are poured out upon the earth, or should I say thrown down, but not like a girl, right? So this is what we're talking about in terms of some of these conditions, and this concludes my discussion of the first trumpet plague. We only have 3 more to go before we get to the really serious woes that lie yet in our future. So buckle up for next time when I'll talk about the second trumpet plague in Revelation chapter 8, verses 8 and 9. This is going to be a plague upon the sea, and it is parallel in many respects to the plague that we've just talked about upon the land. That is, we are going to have a partial judgment on the sea as we have had a partial judgment on the land. Until then, thanks for watching, listening, subscribing, and sharing. And thanks to Jen and Kristen for all their help. I will see you next time on Unveiling Jesus Christ.